This is Paul Levy here, the author of the book Digital Inferno. This is the second of a number of podcasts around Brexit. Like a lot of people, I probably held back from saying anything in the public domain about Brexit, just given how much anger, tiredness, confusion, and actually aggression there is around this issue. And that was something that came up in a taxi journey that I was having this morning on the way to the University of Brighton, where I work part-time from my home. And the taxi driver was immediately commenting on Brexit, which had been playing on the radio, and announced to me that he was a Leaver vote and didn't understand what all the fuss was. And I just wanted to get to work. And I'm sure he had lots of views and lots of things he wanted to share. But what I got involved in that conversation was some thoughts and some reflections, and listening respectfully to him actually, and knowing that people feel very, very strongly whatever side of this argument they are on. And already the use of the word side is at the heart of this particular podcast, because the side is the metaphor of polarity. There's one side of the fence, there's another side of the fence, and actually there are some people who sit on the fence and never come off, looking at the people on each side of the fence. Like a binary code, which is what computers are based on, there is a 1 and a 0, an on and an off. And you could say off are the people that are leaving, and on are the people that want to remain. And whether you sit on the fence, the actual vote counted those on and those off and said in favour and in against, and leave and remain, and around 51 or whatever it was million wanted to leave, and 49 million or so wanted to remain, and so there was a winner. And it's as simple as that for some people. And that's where the reflections came, because the person that was driving me absolutely felt with a strong degree of inner certainty and principle that what they had decided to vote for was now unchangeable, or unchangeable unless it passed the test of a huge amount of change. And so they weren't changing their mind. There was nothing that had happened, no new information that would have changed their mind. Now please, leavers, strong leavers, please do not think you now need to attack this particular video. And I'm finding myself defensive for the second time in these podcasts, because I'm not talking about being in favour of leaving or remaining. I'm talking in these podcasts about being conscious, about being awake and being aware, and being able to be as objective as you can about the decisions that you make. And so what I noticed was, whether you're a remainer or a leaver, there are people coming from this place of deep principle, of deep feeling, to say, I want us to leave the EU, or I want us to remain. And that is enough for them. Those principles are dug very deep, like the roots that take hold in the earth, and they actually hold the whole plant up, the whole tree, and you can't see it, but it's there, strong, able to withstand all the winds of change. The tree may bend, but it's going to take a lot for it to crack. And so those people, in a lot of cases, cannot see the point and cannot see the reason or the value in why anybody would now want to readdress that decision, to perhaps have a second referendum or to revisit it in some way. In fact, some are furious unto death threats and threats of violence against people that would challenge that view. And that can often be when you feel emotionally powered by, your feelings and your convictions that something is right. That's the people that will march from the north of the UK down to London to protest. And I just hold that because on the one side of the argument, there are strong, firm, principled leavers. And the principles are in their body, in their guts, in their feet, in their movement, in their will. And it's very, very now habitual and unconscious. And that's not a criticism either. It's just how it is. Similarly with the Remainers. Now, where we get to a problem is that if you make a decision in your life, and in the light of change, don't change your decision, that can actually kill you and the people around you. If you decide to climb to the top of a mountain and doggedly get to the top, but the weather suddenly changes to a point of it being life-threatening, the people who continue to the top are the ones that are found dead on the mountainside. And that, again, is not intended to irritate anyone, but there are lots and lots of examples in our health, in our life, in the decisions that we make, that when new information comes to light, we might need to change and sometimes do an about face in order to survive or thrive in a different way. My own research over years has been working with particularly small businesses, entrepreneurs, and there's a very, very high rate of business failure in companies that launch products. Their egos, their hearts become too addicted to that founding impulse, that first product, that way of doing things, and they just resist all suggestions to adapt, to change route, and those are the businesses that fail. Although some do succeed and some are proved right in the long run. But overall, this polarity, this being stuck in a camp, stuck in a view, it can't always be good for us to develop that as a habit. And in science, we often say that something is true if it survives your attempts to falsify it, not just to look for it being true, because you become kind of biased in favour of looking for what is true. If something's true, then it's quite good to step into the shoes of the critic and understand what that's like and be open to those views and not just kind of habitually, dogmatically against any sort of challenge to your view. What are you afraid of? In not just with Brexit or any of those issues, what's wrong with subjecting yourself to a little bit of the opposite point of view? At worst, it might just change your mind, or maybe at best. So we're stuck with some very, very entrenched people who, even if they are right or believe they are right, are not open to any sort of deep challenge to the other point of view. And when you end up in a binary place, you can end up with war. You can end up with people literally physically attacking each other. And this has been set up in the way that the referendum was done to create this binary divide, this fence of leave and remain, of either and or. Despite the fact that most of our life decisions, our business decisions, when we look back, were there because it wasn't so simple as that. There was at least a fence on which we sometimes sat, and sometimes there's not even just those three. There's lots and lots of other possibilities. And currently, as I record this, very much being attacked by the binary people are these indicative votes going on in Parliament where people are trying to test out different propositions. Those who voted leave or remain and don't believe they need to change the decision ever feel betrayed by this. But then there's a set of other people, and they always exist, and they're not people who always make binary decisions rooted in their principle, in their gut feel. They make decisions based on the current context. They tend to look around them and decide based on, you might say, pragmatism, you might say realism, on a much more, in some ways, superficial level in terms of they're not always reaching first to these gut feels. They're actually looking at what the weather's like, what the winds of change are blowing right now, and they make decisions based on that. And in the light of new information, they change their decisions. Now, again, I'm not saying that's necessarily the only way to do things either, and sometimes we have to dig deep and make principled decisions of right or wrong. But we are left with a bit of a disastrous perfect storm of a scenario where the deep levers and the contextual, let's see what's going on levers, when they want to change their mind, we have war, we have a problem, because the deep levers don't understand why the other levers are changing to remainers or some other view, and vice versa. The people who make decisions based not on principle but practice about what's going on now are now looking back on a decision 2 years ago. New information has come to light, new fears, new uncertainties, and they want another look. They want to change their decision. It's certainly what small businesses do. It's certainly what individuals do. It's certainly if you go to the doctor and suddenly, heaven forbid, someone says you have a big lump, and if it's not operated on, well, you're going to die. You may change your decision never to have an operation or go to a hospital. You may change your decision about your lifestyle if you have health scares. You may change decisions about your children or your family or yourself based on new information. And we are discovering now, at least on both sides, that that information that was provided at the time was distorted, that budgets were overspent on one side, that other people created unnecessary fear that meant people voted to leave, that PR companies that advertised products and services were paid high fees to try and persuade us, I would say manipulate us to take one view or another. And though that may not have been a problem for the principled leave or remain people who just decided and probably had that in them for a long time as a set of attitudes, the people who looked around looking for objective information acted not necessarily only on those deeper instincts but on the information available, and are now looking back on what's changed since and want to revisit the decision. Now, I'm not arguing for a referendum. I'm not arguing to change anybody that I've just described. I simply point out that these things have consequences to the mess we're currently in. It can never be good for anybody just to have a habit all their life of just sticking to being fixed in their thinking, to just going with a decision, following their subjectivity and never, ever, ever changing. And equally, it's not a good idea just to go with what information is presented to you in the media, particularly in the newspapers and TV, which is often distorted and has its own agenda and interests, and acting on that, finding out later that you should have at least, what we call in research, triangulated, looked for different points of view, different opinions before you made your judgment. And also, you can't flee from those deeper feelings sometimes. Sometimes it's about your values. What we weren't offered was a flexible decision-making process. We weren't told if we voted it would be revisited. We weren't told, for example, that if there was a majority of just a few percent, though that might be a few million, there's a vast number of people who didn't vote and who voted to leave that's actually greater than the number of people who voted to stay and leave. Those two versions of things, the maths doesn't add up as neatly as we might think it does. So we have a problem here in that things aren't objective, things aren't accurate, things were not accurate at the time, that a good number of people in the world change in the light of new information and others stick to their guns. Interesting metaphor there too. So it's not about leave or remain, but we weren't given the decision to make and were told it could be reviewed or it could be changed. We were set up to make the decision of a lifetime, and it means that the principal decision makers are both committed to but stuck with the decision they made and are a bit trapped by it even as they feel empowered by it. And those people who made decisions based on the information available are now asking or scared to commit to decisions where they think the world has changed since. Either way now, that's not very good democracy. It's not very, very clear thinking, and it's not very, very conscious. And it doesn't leave us with an easy way forward. There's no solution to this because those deep leavers and deep remainers would like to delete this particular recording because perhaps it just asks some uncomfortable questions. And what I'm suggesting is all of our big change, whether that's for us and our kids or for our country or for the world, has to be based on the truthful picture. It has to be based on the ability to adapt to what is truly around us. And if we make deep decisions, we need to honour those deep decisions, but equally they should not terrorise us and bind us to changing conditions as the world itself can significantly change. We just give you one example. If we made some decisions now about climate change, and actually we get new data and the planet behaves in ways that we don't understand and we're suddenly under huge threat, but we say, well, we made that decision 10 years ago. This planet may not be around for much longer. Flexible thinking, being aware of what drives and motivates us, why we won't change and why we could change. We need to start building governance, government, democracy around the human condition. We start as babies, we become very, very old, and the conditions that we live in change, and the decisions we make at 5 are not necessarily right for us at 10, 20 or 50. Change is part of the human condition, and whatever side you're on, not changing could just well be death.